Hello class, this video is going to cover the basics on sketching products. Before we get into that, I'd like to talk about Project 3 details and go over this sheet that's in your syllabus that outlines Project 3. So of course, Project 3 is 5 pages overall, laid out similar to this example shown here. And you'll be sketching real life products, and I just wanted to expand on that a little bit. So I would assume there's a question on how complex should these products be. So my answer to that is try and get like at least a minimum combination of 4 basic shapes. So, for example, here, this cylinder would count as 1. This base here would count as, at least 2 or 3 maybe with all these holes poked in them. Maybe this is, would be a 5th shape. And on the front here, you got maybe 6 or 7, 8 shapes going on. But leave it to your discretion. Just try and keep it interesting. If it looks really plain and boring, then maybe you can push it a bit further. Other details I'd like to see happening in this project are soft edges, which I'll give a short demo on this in a minute, but that's represented over here on this image by some of these double edges here, where if you look at real life products, they tend to be soft. It's really rare that they come to a very sharp edge. So that's what all of these double lines represent. Other things I'd like to see are things like part lines. That's kind of like this gap here between the button. The button is a separate piece. It's not simply just a flat shape on this face. It actually has 3-dimensionality to it. And again, I'll give a demo on that in a minute. Of course, no zero thickness. You guys are familiar with that now. So shading and shadow, this shading's a little too basic for what I'm looking for here, and we'll get into shading on Wednesday. But the shadow here, this is okay. It's on the more simple side. This is called a drop shadow, where the shadow is directly beneath the object. I can explain that in a little more detail, but I don't want to see more than 2 drop shadows on this. For at least 3 of the pages, the shadow should be a full plot, just like what we went over in the last video. And finally, orthographic views with 2 to 3 sides shown. That's this here. I'm going to go ahead and change this to 3 sides shown minimum. I'd like to see this consistent layout. And then good composition, of course. And that's kind of what's shown here, where the object is big and off to the side with room for the orthographics on the opposite side. And of course, a vignette is optional. The other optional item is contour lines. That's these lines going through the middle of the object. And then, of course, all the stuff you guys are used to now, varied line weight, title block. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to move into some basics and just talk about what I mean by soft edges and part lines here. So just as a basic example, there was some question last time about using, or not a question, but it came up that blue pencil can kind of smudge or get darker with marker use. So if you're having trouble with that, I would encourage you using your 10% marker to throw it on your underlays as opposed to your blue pencil. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm using this kind of like light marker to represent what I might be doing on this page. And actually, I wish this were bigger because it's a computer. I am just going to scale this way up. Kind of cheating there, but save me a bit of time and make this video hopefully shorter than the last. So let's say this represents a very basic alarm clock here that we might be used to. So the first thing that I think could be a little bit better on this project is these edges and corners here. If you just take a double line on them, it's going to make your object look a little bit more realistic. And again, like I mentioned, objects in real life tend to have softer edges than tight corners that end up looking kind of sharp. And the simplest way to do that is just on all these interior edges, I'm just running 2 lines that are spaced somewhat evenly. That just kind of represent what's called a fillet. I'll write that out. It's a product term. Now let's say there's a big old snooze button on the top here. Now it might be tempting to just draw a shape on here and call it a day. Pretend that this is your button. But at this stage in the class, that's too basic. What I would like to see a better snooze button is to start to build this three-dimensionally. So not only give it a bit of thickness, which again, I've seen some of you do this, so it's great, just keep it up, where you know, build edges to this button, giving it thickness. But what I would like to see is actually start to build in what's called a part line. There's a new part in your object, like this button here. It's not part of the alarm clock. Just give a gap between that part and the existing alarm clock. And again, that's represented by yet another line here. It might feel repetitive to have all these double lines everywhere, but really double lines is what helps add reality to the object you're drawing. Unfortunately, my spacing is a bit off here. It's pretty far forward, and so hopefully I would have planned that better in my underlay. But really, when I shade this with my markers, I'm just going to give a rough example of what that might look like here. This part line could be represented a little bit darker than the areas around it. And it's going to look like there's a bit of a gap or a space here. And that's going to make it look a little more real. Now, of course, I have soft edges here. My button's looking a little sharp. Really, ideally, I would do the same treatment up in the button here. So again, this might represent taking my flare pen and just running double lines on these leading edges closest to me. And really, that's all I'm looking for. I'm just looking for these double lines on these leading edges, and whenever there's a new part, just taking a bit of a gap. And as I build on my demos here, I'll start to I'll point that out. I'll continue this practice and show it in a little more detail. An option is to do contour lines, and again, that's a line that runs down the center of the shape and kind of just gives a little more context as to what's going on those faces and parts of the shape. As far as line weight goes, that would be the lightest line weight. So hopefully that alarm clock demo is clear, just basically as a button. So this is a good button. If I draw a bad button over here, just some basic lines, this is a bad button. So I want to see some three-dimensionality, some space, and form to it. All right, let me jump right into two demos here, just in case. But this is going to represent doing my underlay with a 10% marker. And again, I encourage everyone to try that out with this project, as everything will be shaded with marker. So I would say the way you start, just like everything else, is with an underlay. This first demo is maybe I'm going to be drawing a water bottle. And as we get to this stage, if you're feeling more comfortable taking shortcuts, as long as you know the relative rules, so for example, it should be bigger than this one here, you can start to take some shortcuts, like avoiding setting up full construction lines, like a rectangle that would, set up your cylinder. Of course, if you find that helpful, I encourage you to still do that. Especially when it comes to plotting shadow, it can be a little helpful. So just go at your own pace and do whatever you're comfortable with. Here, again, I'm taking a bit of a shortcut by just getting a big ellipse on the bottom and just getting tighter as I go up, making adjustments with the form at this level, hoping that it fits on the page well. Maybe this is a bit of a lid here. Now, ideally, I want this lid to be a little bit more narrow than the width of my water bottle. I need my water bottle to make sure it has enough interesting complexity. Maybe. So build that in there, making sure I'm not getting too close to the edge of the page. And again, because I'm on my 10% marker, I can be nice and loose and light with my drawing, just kind of building up this form. This is my lid up here. As far as the object you're drawing, it can be a real object that you own or like are looking at a photo reference of, or it can be a brand new object that you design. It's up to you. Whatever you're more comfortable with. It's probably easier to use a reference, like a real life reference, than to design something brand new. Maybe the best option would be to use a real life reference and just change the design slightly as you go about it. So I'm feeling pretty good with my main underlay here. Before I start inking this in, I would encourage you guys all to do the same here. I would set up your orthographics before any shadow or inking goes in. And that's going to ensure that you have enough space for your object. Now, what's key with your orthographics is that proportionally it looks the same as your main drawing here. So, maybe this is the height of my, maybe it's a bit lower. Maybe this is my cap here. This is my bottle. And again, remember an orthographic view is a two-dimensional shape. Maybe this is the lid, this like loop carry handle here. And keeping everything aligned. So if that's the height of the carry handle, then it should be the same here. But of course, in this view, the side view, we would actually see this opening. And ideally, all of these widths would be the same because it's around, and if we want it to be a perfect circular water bottle, this width here should equal this width here, is what I mean. It's just, that's the nature of orthographics. They should be as accurate proportionally as possible. So make sure you get all of that sorted out in your underlay before you ink your drawing in, because that's one of the things I'll be looking at when I grade these. Now, of course, if this is the width, then the top view should also match that. So that's why I extend these lines up. And I just drop a perfect circle in here as best as I can freehand. If this is the lid with the carry handle going like this way, then it should also align in this top view. So here's my carry handle in my top view. And again, I'm kind of messy, but it's all right when you're using your 10% marker. That is maybe what my underlay looks like. If you really wanted, it might actually even make sense in this underlay, to stay with your 10% and just start to plot your shadow. And maybe the last step you do is to ink it in. So again, here are my direction lines. The shadows can be relatively basic for this as long as you know. So the basic shape of this is, of course, a cylinder standing up. So I can use my knowledge of a cylinder standing up to help get my shadow started. Of course, it gets a little bit more complex up here. But as long as we get the basics of the shadow plotting and get it close, it'll look right. And again, for the most part, that's all we're really looking for. So where this direction line touches the cylinder, I'm going to run a line up here. I'm going to stop it at this highest ellipse. I'm going to ignore this top loop for now. I'll show you what I'll do with that in a minute. But again, so if this is the direction line, here's the angle line coming back down this way where this meets. Same thing, I'm going to run a line up the back here where this meets, cast this down, circle those intersection points, and this is where my ellipse is. And again, I know that it has to be, the ellipse needs to be tighter than this one, but bigger than this one. So let's try and eyeball that middle ground. Now, because I intend this to be clear, I might actually cast the base of the lid because this shadow of the lid is gonna be a little bit darker than the clear. So I'm gonna mark these points here. Not a big difference, but this will be the darker part of the shadow here, where that lid is. Now, where this is hitting, the carry loop, again, I can bring an angle down. If I plot a point on the ground plane, again, this is all rough, just rough idea, getting it roughly close. I can take this corner here, bring it all down to the ground plane, roughly it meets here. That's sort of a judge by eye. Kind of plot this here, and I can just kind of fudge it. I know that it kind of comes to a peak. I can kind of look at like where this is going. And maybe that's my carry handle there for my shadow. You can see I'm kind of getting close to my orthographic. So maybe like when the shadow gets shaded in, I'm going to make sure that, I don't get too muddy as it gets close here. Um, it might be a good idea maybe to either move the shadow slightly. If I wanted to take a fresh page, I could do that. But for the sake of time, I think when I ink it in, I'm just gonna try and fade my shadow out so that it doesn't get too close to this orthographic. So feeling pretty good on my underlay, I would now take my Flair pen. And of course, this is the part where it can get a little bit tricky, right? I understand this is where mistakes tend to happen. But just do the best you can. Again, I encourage everyone to freehand here. So you do not have to do any clear objects, but if you want to, I'm going to talk about some of the principles. And we're going to render this together on Wednesday. So again, I'm just ghosting in my ellipse here, trying to keep it as neat as I can. It helps to draw all the way through so that I don't get any tight corners. But when you draw an object that's clear, I like to draw double walls. Again, it's kind of like that zero thickness principle. It shows that this clear object has a little bit of wall thickness to it. You guys can't see me. I'm trying not to spin this for the sake of the video, but I'm actually spinning my computer as I'm sketching on this. I really hope that it's not goofing too badly with the audio. So again, trying to kind of get these soft edges like I mentioned in product design. Nothing too sharp here. Just kind of getting this like really gentle shoulder on the water bottle. Now this is also a form of a part line where when this new part, the lid starts, the object actually jumps in a bit. It's kind of showing like that the lid is a little more narrow. It's a very simple detail that makes it clear that this is a separate part. And really ideally, I would have left like a little bit more of a gap here, and I can still kind of do that in the lid if I want to. By again, doing a double line here. Where, maybe the shoulder ends and the lid starts. And I'm not drawing ellipses all the way through there, which again is not really a good thing to show you guys, because then, if you look at this, it's creating a bit of a point. So try to avoid that. And again, inking up into this carry loop, looking at my underlay to try to stay on point with that. And again, kind of trying to keep these soft edges. My horizon line is, because we're not seeing the top of the carry loop, the horizon line is below it. Which again, at this stage, you might be able to just kind of get a feel for your object without fully defining everything, if you're comfortable with that. Now, because this is clear, we do see the back of this. And of course, that is one of the properties of a clear object, is you can see through it to state the obvious. But it helps to then draw that. So that might be our bottle. Once I have that inked in, I would come over here and start inking in the orthographics. Not forgetting the details like the slight cone base that kicks in. The product term for that is a chamfer. That's this like chisel that angles in. Again, trying to keep this roughly the same size. I'm resisting the urge to control Z because I know you guys can't do that. And just trying to treat these two as similar as possible because it's a round object. And we know from the last video that cylinder orthographics are the same. Of course, in this instance, because of the carry loop, they're going to be a little bit different. but just make sure that everything aligns. When I grade this, what I look for more than just checking that they're the same width. This one looks a little bit fatter than this one. I'm more looking that like the top of this aligns with the top of this. And now when it comes to drawing the top view, same thing, that the width of this aligns to this circle. And now, for example, what I just drew here, this looks a little bit wider than this does. So I'd probably remove a little bit of points for that. So I'm going to be a little more careful with this. I'm going to take this corner, I'm going to extend it up just to keep myself in line with that top view there. Now with that inked in, I'm going to go ahead and do the shadow. Now, of course, this little cone here does give us a bit of problems with the shadow, but the shadows can be somewhat basic, again, as long as they're mostly right. I'm just going to treat this cone by just coming out and meeting this direction line and running this back. I'm going to draw this a little bit lighter back here, a little bit lighter pressure. That may not work as well with a flare in real life. And like I was saying, because we're getting close here, I'm just going to kind of leave that part of the shadow a little bit ambiguous. And maybe because this is the darker part of the shadow, this is the parallel hash marks that I'll put in here. And again, I'll fade it out as I get closer to this orthographic. And I'll just leave the rest for inking, essentially. Ideally, the 10% marker would be a little bit lighter like this. And we could come in and ink this later with full shading. Now let me get a good size here that represents what a Sharpie might be. And just, that feels a bit big to me. And just come in and drop some heavier line weight on this. And again, I'm just kind of staying on one side with my Sharpie here. You don't really need to do varied line weight on your orthographics. It wouldn't hurt, I guess, if you wanted to. You could play with it, but orthographics are more kind of like technical drawings, so I'd say it's not as necessary to have them on there. And of course, last but not least, if I wanted to, maybe I could throw a bit of a vignette on it. I like to take my vignette, do my orthographics to kind of tie everything together. Maybe it's through the center. I guess I'm doing several passes with my lines here to just get them a little bit darker, but again, ideally I wouldn't have gone this far either. All right, so that represents basically what we're looking for here. I'll do one more, hopefully quick demo on this. And again, no need to ink any of, shade any of this yet. What I'm looking for just now is line work, and we'll talk about more complex product shading on Wednesday when I'm back. Again, what I'm looking for is 2 sheets. Do not feel obliged to draw a water bottle. In fact, I would prefer, if you do draw a water bottle, to just change the design from mine. So that not everyone has the exact same objects. Of course, you can follow along with this tutorial to get a basic idea, but if you want to do a water bottle, maybe. So what I'm drawing now, again, I'm doing the same process. This is representing my 10% marker in real life. This object here be a pencil sharpener. Again, I'm going to do clear. It's not a requirement to do any clear objects for this project, but it's an opportunity to teach you guys a new rendering technique and a new material. So I'm setting this up to teach that. Now, as I'm working on this underlay, I'm realizing, maybe it's a little bit small. So what I can do is, if I feel that way, is just bring this face down. Again, just checking that sort of all my convergence is good. At this stage, I expect you guys to have a pretty good grasp on perspective, but just double check that stuff. So again, because this is clear, we're going to see some double wall here to avoid paper thinness, and it helps communicate that this is a clear object. We're also going to see the sharpener in here with the blades, and, maybe a bit of a gap here. This is where it goes in. The other thing with product sketching is some realism. So this is sort of a clear piece, again, with sort of these soft corners that I was talking about. If this is a clear piece with this cone inserted into it, there might be some screw bosses that would attach this part here. Again, when I ink that in, hopefully I make that a bit more clear. I will attempt to make that more clear. You would see this back corner. Now, when it comes to I keep dropping these dark marks on here. When it comes to the orthographics, same thing. Once you have your underlay for this setup, I would drop the orthographics in now, just to make sure you leave enough room for them. If you do all the inking in and orthographics last, there's a chance you will run out of room for your orthographics. So let's see, roughly the same size. Maybe these orthographics could be just a little bit bigger. So maybe this is my, and again, I'm going to be, when I'm grading this, I'm looking for the orthographics to be roughly the same proportion as the three-dimensional shape. If you're unsure about that, we can, happy to review your drawings. So if this is the pencil sharpener, here's the cone. Give a little bit of double wall thickness to this. Again, carry this back over. This is the front view. It's this view here. Now I'm going to draw this side view, which is a little bit skinnier. Again, when I grade this, I'll be looking for things like if the base is this high in the front view, it should also be that high in the side view. If the cone goes to this level, I'm looking for the cone to go to also this level. Proportionally, it feels like this side view is getting a little too skinny, so I'm just going to bump it out. And again, because I'm still on my 10% marker, I can get away with fudging this stuff. Sketching is not perfect off the bat. It's you're kind of building up. This top view should be about the same width as this side view. So just judge that by eye. You can also kind of elongate the lines. And hopefully this would be a perfect square if they were the same size in here. But I'm not looking to be that, you don't have to be that accurate. I'm not going to judge that harshly, but I mean, I do want it to be close. I'm going to judge it by eye, and if it looks wrong, then I'm going to take points off. So if you want to be accurate, you can use tricks like that to try and get that sorted out. All right, now same thing. Once the orthographics are set up, I would start to plot the shadow. Now, a drop shadow, like on that example sheet in the syllabus, is when you bring the shadow just straight down beneath it. And so what I'm looking for when I'm grading a drop shadow is that it's not any wider than the object. It's helping communicate the object's form. And really, it's just kind of mimicking what's going on with these lines here and just following that, but also bits of perspective and dropping this in here. But again, that's kind of a more simple take on it. I prefer to see plotted shadows. And And for the most part, the plotted shadows should go behind the objects. So what does that mean? I don't want to see any shadows that are coming forward like this, because that means the object is backlit, which is not typical. I prefer to see a shadow, either going off to the side here like this, or even going back this way behind the object. And in fact, that's the kind of shadow I'm going to plot on this one. Now, because it's going back into the distance, you could go parallel. You could have these lines start to converge a little bit. Again, these are representing the direction lines, and these could converge to a point eventually if you want to have a sense of the shadow converging. It does add a little bit of complication, so you don't have to do that, but I'm going to because it looks just a little bit better. Now, I'm going to find the bottom plane of this back corner here with my with my 10% marker. I'm going to have all of my direction lines going back. And I'm going to take kind of a top-down lighting and just kind of hit all of these angles the same, making sure that each of these are relating properly. This one. And honestly, sometimes this is what your shadow looks like. It's really basic. It's actually partly hidden by the objects. And that's okay. But again, because this is clear, we're actually going to see part of the shadow through. All right, now last but not least, ink everything in. This is kind of the slightly messier part of the process. I mean, ideally it's not, or not messier, I don't mean that. I'm just saying with the flare, I acknowledge that it's harder. But just do the best you can. And again, I encourage everyone to stay with freehand. Don't forget to spin your page. Don't forget to lock your arm as you're sketching here. So again, here you can see that as this pencil sharpener transitions to this base part, I'm giving it another soft edge here with this double line. And again, it's kind of a bit of a part line because the object changes in depth. It kind of communicates better that it's a separate part. Honestly, this is, as I finish inking this in, let me make this final point here. I mentioned before that, you might want a little bit of realism to your object, especially if you're designing something new that doesn't exist. Just look at reference objects that are similar. So again, if this is a cone dropped in here, maybe there's 2 screws and that's how this is mounted, right? Look at objects, look at how they're constructed. It's going to add a lot of realism to your object if you start to hint at how the object is made and how it comes together. The more details you include, the more real it's going to look and feel. So that's kind of what all of these things represent. Now just double check your perspective too, right? As I look at this, I can see that I have a bit of divergence here. So if I were you, what I would do in this instance is I'd fix it with the Sharpie. I might start my Sharpie here and try and bring it in. And just leave it, don't chase it. I just did that one Sharpie line. I'm just going to leave it at that and bring this down. Getting into my Sharpie a little earlier than I normally would, but just to show you guys how I might correct a bit of that divergence with the heavier line weight. To keep this video short, I'm going to stop talking now. This is more or less all that I'm looking for from you guys. For those that are curious, I will finish this as I finish the other one. But as far as like useful information and what you need to know, it's pretty much covered in that first demo with the water bottle. This is just kind of a repetition showing a different object. But what I'm looking for on Wednesday is 2 sheets similar to what I have set up here. So again, pick 2 objects to draw. It doesn't have to be a water bottle or a pencil sharpener. It can be whatever you want, whatever interests you. For those interested in graphic design, if you want to, maybe do like a trophy with a logo as the main 3D form, that's okay. Maybe it's a logo on a base. So that's a way to kind of work a little bit of abstraction into this project. I would like to, if that's what you want to do, I would like to talk with you about your object just to make sure there's enough realism in it. But that's definitely an option. So yeah, with that said, that's about all I have to say, and I'll just finish inking this in for any that are curious to watch. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.